Hello and welcome to Edupedia World. So here we are inside of Cinema 4D, and what you're seeing here is a very simple 3D model of a cartoonish, what can we call a robotic arm, and this is what we're gonna be texturing today. So it's going to be pretty exciting. We're gonna be adding some stripes to make it look like a some kind of machine, some like black and yellow stripes. We're also going to be just adding simple colors, and we're going to be making some simple, very simple metal materials. So that's going to be this chapter. Sorry, not this chapter, but just this video. Then afterwards we'll be setting up the lighting and making a studio to render this little thing out. So I am pretty excited for this. So first let's take a look at what this crane or robotic arm consists of. So we will go over to our objects bin, and as you can see, it consists of a ton of different bits and pieces. So if you just pick one, you can see they are named in Danish, so you won't be able to understand it unless you're from Denmark, of course. So this is like just a cylinder, and it sits right here. You can see it's highlighted. I can move it around, but I actually don't want to do that because I'm gonna ruin my I'm gonna be ruining my my robotic arm. So let's first of all start making the like the base color of this thing. So it's going to be yellow, and then it's going to have some metal parts. This is going to be metal. This part right here, and these parts are going to be metal. Also these cylinders, the pistons, they're going to be metal. I think this base plate here will be metal. We are going to be doing some sub-material, sub-object materials. I will show you what that is. So yeah, let's just start. So from our introduction to modeling, I also added some simple materials. So right now you should be able to know how to add a material. You basically go into this menu here in the bottom and just double click like this, and you've got a material. We can double click again to open up the material editor. I will call this base color, and we are ready to start editing the color. So first of all, I want to just, this is going to be a pretty simple material. I'll just select a color. So I want something that's like, I know this may be good actually. So now you can see we have changed the color, and since the color channel is active, whatever we have changed in here will affect our material. So there's also a channel called Diffuse. I won't be using Diffuse for this one. I won't be using Luminance either. Luminance, if I turn on Luminance, that means my material will start illuminating or emitting light. As you can see right here, it's going to emit light. You can also add transparency. That's going to make it transparent. They are all pretty self-explaining. Environment, I will show that later. Bump map, we may actually add a bump map. A bump map basically it can add some texture to the surface, so it's like not just complete straight, but there are actually like a few little bumps and just a bit of curves and stuff. The first two channels I want to change is the color. I've already done that, and then the next one will be Reflectance. So the Reflectance channel is basically your reflections and also your specular. In the older versions of Cinema 4D, you had a specular and a reflection channel. in R16, these have now been compressed into just one reflectance channel. So if we go into default specular, we can start changing our specular, and our specular is basically the highlight. So you can see if we change the width, you can see this representation right here shows pretty nicely what is happening with the specular. So this fall off, I usually like to keep the fall off at 0% unless I'm doing a very specific material. So I want this to look like some kind of polished metal or like hard plastic or something. So you can basically see, if you were to change the inner width, what does that do? It makes it so that the fall off has like a straight part in the middle. You can change the fall off so that it gets like very spitz or more flat. You can also change the way you can also change the attenuation. So right now it's set to additive. If we set it to metal, you'll see it actually looks very different. This we had this option in Cinema 4D in the Cinema 4D versions past before R16. So this is going to be pretty this is going to be known to some people who have already used Cinema 4D. The ones I'm more interested in are these other options you get right here. So you can see these are the one we're using right now. We're using the Specular Blend Legacy. There are also a lot of other options. So let's just try the reflection. And when you use the reflection, you can see you get both roughness, reflection strength, and the specular strength. So the roughness basically shows how much it's going to be the specular right here, how much the specular is going to be like diffused, and of course the specular strength like determines how like how strong the specular is. Then you can also add just a simple reflection like this. So as you can see, it just starts reflecting like the environment around this ball. So there's a default environment that's going to be shown. If I turn down the roughness, as you can see, the reflection gets much more clear. So you can see there's actually a tree and it's sitting on a road. So since this is going to be some kind of yellow metal, let's actually make it yellow metal. So, and since it has been painted, the surface isn't going to be completely sharp. So I want some kind of roughness. I also want to turn down the reflection strength just a bit, maybe add a bit of specular like this. I think we've got a pretty decent material right here, but we can make it even better by adding a bump channel. So I will show you what the bump channel does. First we want to enable the bump channel, and then we want to go up here and add a texture. So I will go into my file system and find some kind of texture. So I've got a lot of different metal looks right here that we can add. So I'll just find something that has a pretty what can we call it, a pretty even texture to it. So I chose this texture of some rust. What the program will do is that it will look at this picture of this rust, and then we'll analyze it and see where, as you can see, yeah, we can open it in a small window. It will analyze it, and then it will say, okay, where is the dark parts and where are the bright parts? So all the dark parts, they will be like pushed into the model, and all the bright parts, they will be elevated, and that means we are going to get a bit of roughness on the surface. In order for Cinema 4D to do this properly, this picture has to be in black and white, and therefore I will click on this little drop-down menu and then add a filter. I will click on the filter and I will turn the saturation to -100, and that means it's going to be black and white. I may add just 2% of contrast, and then I will go back out, so I can open this window up with our material, and Cinema 4D will now, as you can see, Cinema 4D has now rendered our material. So you can see that it has some kind of roughness to the surface. I may turn this down to, let's say, 6%, and then I will let it render once again. And rendering will be something that 3D programs take a long time to do, a bit depending on your system. But now we can see it has rendered this out, and I think this surface looks very nice. It has a bit of ruggedness to it, a little bit bumpy, and has some nice reflections. So that's about it for the base color. We can now close this, and it's now time to add it onto our model. So if we are in this model selection mode, we can just double click on whatever part we want to add this onto. So okay, so I double clicked on this part right here, and it shows up as being highlighted over here. That means we can take our texture and just drag it onto the object. And since, as you can see, all these other objects down here, they are a child of this object. So if I like click on this minus, it's going to be folded together. That means whatever is added to this object will be added to all the other objects. So yes, that's just something to keep in mind. But we can now see how our material is acting, and I don't know if you can see it, but I can see that it's acting a little bit weird, and that is because of how this material has been mapped onto our object. So first of all, let's take this, and instead of having it on this object, put it on the very first object. That means everything will get this color, and since this is our base color, I think it's just fine to have this on everything. So we can then, if we want to make this a different color, we can then override it by adding it exactly onto this cylinder. So there is an option for us to change these colors later, but I don't know if you can see it, but the texture is stretched. I know you can see these kinds of lines that are right here. There are some kind of lines, and that's because the texture hasn't been mapped perfectly onto our object. If we didn't use the bump map, this wouldn't have been a problem, because the mapping only matters when you have some kind of a texture or a picture or something that has to be mapped onto the object. So right now it's doing something that's called UV mapping, and you can see that if you click on the material up here, you will see down here at projection, it's doing UV mapping, and that basically means it's using the UVs of this object. So you don't need to know what that is right now. UV mapping is actually it's kind of old. No one really uses UV mapping any longer, so I don't. So yeah, and I've come quite a long way without using UV mapping ever in my life. So let's try to set this to cubic instead and see what that has done. So if we zoom into our model and just look right here where the highlight is, you can see around here. If I turn this back to UV mapping, you will be able to see the difference. So right here there's a lot of lines, and it's all stretched. If you put it to cubic, it's all nice and even, and In my opinion, this looks a lot nicer. Right here. We can try to change the scale. If we were to put this to something like, let's put it back to 100. If we put this to something like 200 by 200, that means, oh sorry, not 500, that's 200. That means the grains are going to be like 4 times as large, and you can basically change the scale of your texture. I think it looks quite alright like this. So yeah, we can just continue. I will just quickly turn this down just a bit to something like 3%, because it was just too much. So we will now continue by adding other details. So this is yellow, and if we look at the color wheel, I don't know if we can get a color wheel to show right here. Color table? No, I want a color wheel. No, there is no color wheel, there's only this guy. So you can see we've got some yellow color, and we want to give these cylinders a matching color. So I will pick something like blue or purple, because they are the closest to the complementary colors. Maybe a dark blue. So let's create a material, double click, and call this piston. I don't know, piston. Oh, piston base. Give it a dark blue color, maybe a bit Turkish like this, and go into the Reflectance channel and change the default specula. This time I will try to use something like Beckman, GGX, Fong, or WAD, and you can basically just play around with these. They're going to make your materials look very metal like. So I will use this GGX. I really like this one because it's very easy to get something that looks like metal. So I can add some reflection, add a bit of specula, and I think this material looks quite alright as it is. So I can basically just drag this onto the objects that I want to be blue, and those are these pistons. So as you can see on this object, we've got a bit of a problem. Let me just, this is a fault I made when I modeled this, but the actual problem is that this part right here is blue, and we don't want that to be blue. We want that to have the same metal color as this piston right here. So of course this hasn't gotten a metal color yet, but when we go to color this yellow, we will have to color this as well, and I'll show you guys how you can do that. So I think it's now time that we create a metal texture, because there are a lot of metal parts on this robotic arm. So let's double click once again, create a material and call it metal. I will just pick, yeah, almost leave it at the default color, go into the Reflectance channel, and let's use this Fong once again. I will add some more reflectance this time because it's metal, and I will turn the roughness down. May even go in and make this a bit darker like this, and there we go. In my opinion, this looks like metal. If we set it to metal, it's going to get some properties that act more like metal than the other materials. So I think this is going to be very nice. We have our metal material, we can basically drag it onto these other parts of the model. Oh, for some reason it hit the wrong part of the model. Oh, so if I needed to go into the object mode before I could double click and select the object. So I selected this one, I'll go down and find it, and there we go. Double click and the object will show up in the object panel. I can just drag it onto the object like that. Double click once again and I have the axle, drag it onto the object. And I'm basically just doing this for all these objects. So as you can see, when I put this onto this cylinder, it added the material to all the other parts. And that's basically because they are parented to each other. So I want this piece right here to be partially yellow and partially metal. So I will double click to find the object, and then I will go up here and turn off this hypernerves. I will tell you what a hypernerves is later in this tutorial series, but not right now. You just want to turn it off, and then I'll go into the sub-object mode, and I will choose this sub-object mode where I can choose faces, and I will basically I will turn on the hypernerves once again, and then this way I can go in and by just using, like, pressing 9 and using the live selection tool as I showed you in the first lesson, I will go in, hold shift and select the polygons here in the middle. So these are the polygons that I want, and I want these to be metal, so I will add the metal onto those once again. Nothing has changed because it was already metal colored. But what I can do is, if I go back to the object mode, double click and find it right here, I can add this base color to it. So since the base color is in front, so it's like this is the bottom layer of code, and then the bottom coat of paint, then this will be the next coat. And since this is on top, that means this will be painted metal. But if I just take this and drag it out in front of the yellow paint, that means it will be on top and it will be shown. So I think these pads are fine in metal, and there are just a few pieces left that I have to pick a color for. So this one has to be metal. So once again, with this object we needed to change the way this was colored. So we'll go into the polygon mode, and I will press U on my keyboard. I'll press U, and then I will press L, U, L, and this gives me a tool called the loop selection tool. So this will basically select loops on my model. So what I will do is that I will just hover over these parts. So I'll just click, hold shift, click, hold shift and click, and that way I will have selected this part of the model. I can then take my metal texture and drag it onto the selected part, and if I deselect, the material has been applied. Let's also add the metal material to this base. So I will double click on the base, or just find the base, then I'll do U L again, and since this is a cylinder, it's very easy to just select the whole top part. You can see it's all selected now using the loop tools, and there we go, it's all selected right now. I'll take the metal texture and drag it onto the base. And since I added this texture to the base, it has now overridden the yellow texture. I will overcome that. I will take this texture and let's try this. There we go. It's now normal again. Let's also add the metal texture to this little piece right here. So it's actually very easy to add these textures. You basically just double click and you're able to add textures. So now I've got these two cubes, or whatever they're called. I don't know what this shape is, but I've got them selected and I want to add a texture to this indented part. So by using the live selection tool and holding shift, I will basically go around the model and select the polygons that I want to be colored. Go over to the other object and start selecting once again. So yellow may not be the best color when you're doing selections because the selected area is yellow, so it can be a bit hard to see what actually is selected. But just takes a bit of practice. As you can see right here, I selected too much, and instead of having to select everything again, I can deselect by holding Control and then dragging over the selected part. It will then be deselected, and there we go, everything is now selected. I will drag the metal texture onto this part, and once again, for some reason everything wants to go black. I'm pretty sure that's because it didn't hit this selection. So these cubes, I will then add the yellow texture to override, and there we go. You're going to have to fiddle around with these textures a bit in order to get it all down to work properly. And there we go. Let's try to do a quick render. So do zoom out to see the whole model and find the right angle you want to see. Just do Control R. And right now the computer will go through and start rendering out the final picture. So as you can see, the metal parts that we have created, they are really chrome. They look, in my opinion, they look absolutely cool. So as you can see, they are really reflecting everything, but since all the backgrounds and stuff, they're all black, they don't reflect very much. But as you can see down here, it's reflecting the crane itself. The crane is reflecting itself. These pistons, they reflect everything. I think it looks very, very, very cool. In the next video, we'll do that right now. Let's go into this new material and add a what can we call it? Stripes. This will be using a picture, so I'll actually let the Reflectance channel stay. Go into color, and then in the color channel you can also pick a picture for the color channel, and that means it won't be doing like bumps as in the bump channel, but right here it will be making the picture itself. So I think it's in decals, and here we go. I've got a cool safety stripe decal, and this is the picture. Let us just add a bit of reflection to this. I'll go down, choose reflection, add a bit of reflection, because this is still metal, you know. This is also metal. Let's not make it too much, but just like this. And what we want to do now is select, using this tool, double click on like this robot arm, and go into the polygon mode, and using the tool, the live selection tool, we can select the polygons inside of this hole. I'll also do it on the other side. There we go. And now we'll take the picture of the stripes and drag it onto the model. So for some reason it has been added to that part. I don't want that. It's actually been added to the completely wrong part of the model. There we go. I'll delete this. For some reason it was added all over there. I'll take the yellow this yellow texture and add that onto this part as well, and drag the stripes in front. And once again you see that these stripes are all over the place. So again, you put it to cubic, and it's already much better. We then want to go into the coordinates and change the rotation. So you're going to have to fiddle around until you find the right one. So this is the right one. I'll put this to 90 degrees, and the texture will now be on the right orientation. We can then go down here and change the offsets, and also the size. 200 by 200 should actually do the trick. And this way, by just offsetting it, we can get the whole picture to fill this box. In my opinion, this makes it look a bit more cartoonish, and since that's the look I'm going for, I think it's very nice. So I will just quickly do that on all these other arms, and yeah, we can continue by setting up lighting and all that other stuff. So I'll just select, add the material, add the yellow material beneath, so drag this on top, set it to cubic, and 90 degrees, 200% in length and height. Or for this one, you actually have to make it even larger, so let's try 300 by 300. Just fiddle around with the offset until it matches, and there we go. We can double click on the last one down here, go into the polygon mode, select, and let's actually just deselect a bit right here, because I selected too much and I can't see what I have selected. So this is alright. Add this. Let's try again. Add this like that, and the yellow texture on the bottom, this on top. Put it to cubic, 90 degrees. Let's try 300% by 300%, and start playing around with the offset. So there we go, a bit of offset like that. And now let's try to make a last render before we continue. So right now we've got these pictures, as you may remember, we added some reflection to these stickers, so they will actually be reflecting as well. If there were something to reflect, they would be reflecting. So we will see that when we add the studio, we will see them reflect and stuff. But right now I actually think this looks pretty cool. This would fit into this would fit into a lot of cartoon films or stuff, and as you saw, it rendered very quickly. So I know this has been a pretty long session, but materials there are very important, and I think this was a great way to show how to use them. So next we will take a look at lighting and then setting up a camera and rendering. So stay tuned, it's going to be very exciting. Thank you for watching Edupedia World. Stay tuned for more videos.